Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of Connected Conversations. This is our endeavor here at Planview to host a series with thought leaders that'll talk about some thought-provoking ideas on what's happening in the enterprise. Why is it important to have connectivity, connectedness, and the connected fabric of the enterprise? So I'm really excited to welcome our first guest today, who is Dr. Frances Frei. She hates being called a doctor because she wants to make sure everyone knows that she's not a medical doctor, but Frances has been a long time, over 20-year veteran at Harvard Business School and a thought leader, a global thought leader when it comes to topics around leadership, organization, culture, operations. And she sits on the intersection of all of the above. And in all full disclosure, Frances has also been helping, together with her partner, Anne Morris, with some work here at Planview in helping us reshape and rethink and think deeper around our mission, our sense of purpose, our values, and our vision going forward. So, Frances, welcome to this first episode of Connected Conversations.
Oh, it's such a privilege to be on the first episode. Thank you, Razat.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, Frances, obviously, the world has gone through a lot of change, in some ways unprecedented in the last 2 years. And there's a lot that leaders are dealing with in grappling with that change. What are you seeing as some of the key themes emerge when it comes to both organizations and leaders having to adapt and change to this new normal going forward?
I think we're in the fall of 2021, really at an inflection point. I think a bunch of companies are going to get it. I'll describe what I mean by that. And they're going to have a relatively smooth time through. And then there's going to be some companies, maybe the majority, that don't get it. And I think it's going to delay their ability to get through by years. And here's what I mean by so what do we get? And I think it is this connectedness, which is if we thought we were going back to the same level of connectedness we had before, it's not going to work going forward. We need now to be connected when we're remote, when we're doing all different things. So we have to really redesign and turbocharge the ways in which we're connected. And some companies put up with it during the pandemic and thought, okay, now finally I can go back. I think the go back plan isn't going to work very well, but the go forward to further embracing connectedness, I think those companies are going to have a much easier time over the next few years.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the connectedness works in multiple dimensions, right? And one of those is related to, how do you connect strategy that the organization are trying to employ with outcomes or execution of the strategies, right? And especially when you're in large, complex organizations, global companies, multi-regional, multi-divisional, multiple business units. What are you seeing the role of strategy? And strategy is a word that gets overused, right? And different people mean different things by it. But what's your point of view? What's the role of strategy in this time of constant change?
Oh, it's so good. So and strategy, in whichever way that we're going to define it, but I think we can say it's our plan to win, right? We'll summarize it as that. And the more complicated our environment, the more detailed our strategy has to be. So the challenge usually isn't can the senior leadership team figure out a beautifully crafted strategy that's going to work, but it's can they get that strategy embedded in the hearts and minds of every single person in the organization such that it guides the discretionary behavior of every single person in the organization. And that's going to be the challenge. So one, we have to get the strategy right. In this uber confident world, I'm quite optimistic about that. But the getting it into the hearts and minds, again, it requires a level of connectivity, and because you can't say it once, you can't say it in a newsletter. You have to find all the different ways to embed it in the hearts and minds of all of the farthest reaching parts of the organization so that we're all rowing in the same direction. And then we have a chance.
Yeah, yeah. It's really interesting. You said, in some ways, developing a strategy is the easier part, right? But getting it into the hearts and minds of the people, and keeping that aligned and avoiding that drift, as you're operationalizing, as you're executing, is the harder part. What have you seen as some of the key ingredients in helping ensure that you can win the hearts and minds and maintain that alignment, and to maintain that connected fabric in terms of the strategy versus what is actually being operationalized in these organizations?
The benefit the team that developed the strategy had is that they worked on it intensely and immersively for a very long period of time. They then end up using some summary statements, but those summary statements are summarizing work they did. The mistake we make is then we go out and use those summary statements to people who didn't participate in the immersive work. And those are just drive-by bumper stickers that don't mean anything. So we have to really involve the rest of the organization so that the summary statements mean something to them, not please remember this. And I see that mistake in
Yeah,
organization after organization.
yeah, yeah. That's very interesting. And do you think, in creating those summary statements, there's a bigger role in with today's generation of the workforce when it comes to having a sense of purpose behind that strategy? What do you think? What
Yes.
role does purpose play in strategy formulation, but also operationalizing strategy?
Yeah, and they're both great. And I mean, thank goodness for the current generation, the current youngest generation of the workforce, because they have insisted that we be a better version of our collective selves in a way that I don't think previous generations did. And I, for one, am really grateful for it. So, um, uh, but they will likely not accept summary statements. Like
Right.
previous generations might have said, that's a summary statement, sure doesn't make sense, but okay. This one
Yeah.
is like, stop. It
Yeah.
doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
Bifurcate it. What does this mean? What does this mean? What does this mean? And then what they'll do, which is what most people who engage do, is they have the ability to interpret ambiguous information negatively.
Right.
So they might not give us the benefit of the doubt of all of the unsaid. So for this
Right.
generation, we have to say a lot to get around the summary statements. And goodness, I'd involve them. So, it's not like there's strategy execution. Strategy design is easy and strategy execution is hard. My strategy colleagues at HBS would be
Yeah.
laughing at me right
Yeah.
now. My
Yeah.
operations colleagues would be very happy. But you want
Yeah.
to design a strategy that can be executed in your context.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I would involve people at all stages of it, because what other people know, they might not know as much about strategy, but they
Yeah.
know about what can be executed in our context.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it comes to disconnects, right? Every organization has risk of disconnects, and obviously sometimes that leads to the drift from strategy, right? What do you think are some of the root causes around what causes disconnects in organizations,
Yeah.
based on your study of many
Yeah.
organizations in the world?
Well, one of them is your previous question when you brought up nobility. If we have a noble purpose to what we're doing, that reconnects disconnects. Because if we feel, well, we can each at least get together on our purpose. And so that
Yeah.
will be the guiding light. So organizations that don't have purpose, if we get disconnected a little, we could get disconnected more and more and more. So one problem isn't that disconnects occur, it's that the reconnecting doesn't occur. There's not
Right.
this snap back.
Okay.
That occurs. And I think that can come from the noble purpose. I think it can come from the core values, and it can come from the just constant useful communication and seeing the people walk the talk of what the values are.
Right. Right. And I think this is where I think today's generation, has a mindset to hold leadership accountable, right? For walking the talk, to your point, and being authentic, right? Not just using buzzwords, generic statements, and your actions to reflect a different reality. That doesn't really this just doesn't work anymore. And I think um, teams and people from a ground up are holding their leaders accountable, right? And so as you think about this more active workforce and the current generation of people that are getting introduced into the workforce, and of course some of the things that have transpired in the last 2 years that have been super challenging with the pandemic and all the social and economic aspects that have and medical aspects that have kind of surrounded the pandemic all over the world. What do you think is really happening in terms of the evolution of leadership styles, and what is being more effective as a leader mean in today's context?
So you have so many beautiful things in there. So I'll answer the third one first, but then I want to get to accountability and authenticity because they're right at the center of it. So the
Yeah.
leadership part is, look, we know which orientation of leadership works today. And it's the one where, as a leader, I understand that my job as a leader, when I'm practicing the art of leadership, I'm trying to make others better, first in my presence, but in a way that endures into my absence. And when people who are put in the executive positions have that frame of mind, they're doing a great job of leading.
Right.
Now, there are really important roles of authenticity and accountability. Authenticity is best thought of as, I'm going to do the work to try to make myself more authentic, because you're not going to trust me if I'm not.
Right.
It is less effective for me to say, Razat, you are not authentic, because authenticity comes from within. It's really hard from someone on the outside to demand it.
Right.
I have to get in the position, but the cost is clear. If you don't believe in my authenticity, you're not going to trust me, and everything's going to get harder.
Right.
Accountability, I think we're at an inflection point in the history of enterprises, in that for a while, we thought that the way to handle accountability was for me to hold you accountable, for me to hold you in judgment. It turns out if you have an organization where everyone is working together and an organization where some people are holding other people in judgment, there's no comparison into which one works.
Yeah.
One where everyone is working together is the one that works. And so this accountability, which has come from such a great place, is giving people timeouts from doing their job of connecting and is actually separating. So I think great leaders of the next couple of years are going to learn how to liberate their workforce from having to spend so much time on thinking about the accountability of others.
Yeah.
Think about the accountability for themselves and for their collective selves.
Yeah.
We and I are much better words in front of accountability than you. I think that it didn't ever really come up historically because we've never seen it in place like it is now. There are so many people that think, if I took Planview as a company, I bet there are people in the front line who are really thinking, Razat, about how you should be doing your job, and they're spending and I would love to liberate them from that, because it just can't possibly be the best career development for them. It's not going to set them up for the best in the future. So I think accountability is one that we are globally struggling with. It's one of the things that has come out of the uncertainty of the pandemic.
Yeah.
But authenticity, each of us looking how to be authentic, and then making sure that our part of the business is authentic. And authentic is simply, I'm saying what I mean.
Yeah.
I'm not trying to say one thing and mean another. Like, I'm being pure in that way. That really does accelerate trust.
Yeah.
Whereas the accountability kind of takes away time and energy and puts in a little bit more judgment and a little bit less curiosity. So I guess one we want more of, and the other we want to reorient.
Yeah, yeah. Authenticity and accountability and the correlation with organizational trust, beautiful ideas, definitely. And when you think about organizations of the future, of course, there are all kinds of new business models that are emerging, and digital transformation is rampant. In some ways we're going through what some people frame as the fourth industrial revolution. We're living through it. People will write about it maybe 100 years from now, right? So obviously a lot of technology driven innovations are happening across many organizations, and we definitely see that in our customer base as well. What do you think is the role of people, the human talent in this age of technology, right? And I'm asking that knowing fully well that there's automation happening, in so many operational elements, process elements, decision elements, right? But the humans, the person, the individual, the talent, the human talent is, or the human capital is still very front and center. What is the role of human capital going forward in the backdrop of this increasingly technology-enabled organization?
That's wonderful. So I've never met an organization that didn't tell me that people were their competitive advantage. But if I ever put my anthropologist hat on and looked around, I'd be like, wow, I'm not observing that you really believe that. So they said it, but I didn't observe it. So I guess from our earlier conversation, it didn't appear authentic. I will say that going forward into this world where we're going to have much more and different types of technology to facilitate all of this, if people are not our competitive advantage, we're going to become commodified. Yeah. So I would say, given all, the way I would frame it is, given these new constraints and new explosive ways that this technology is permitting us, how can we use people to create the most value? And organizations that do that, they're going to be the ones who win.
Yeah. And in some ways, this ties back to the need for leadership and the evolution for leadership, right? Because of course, you're trying to balance between customers and shareholders, but let's not forget the people, right? And one of the things we try to practice at Planview, and we really have a strong belief around this, is that, look, employee success plus customer success is what earns us the right to have business or shareholder success, right? But especially in a business like ours, we don't own buildings, we don't carry inventory. Our biggest asset is our people, right? And now a lot of people say that, but what we really try to do is to make sure we invest in it as well, and we live it every day. And because if the people are successful, they feel that they are empowered, that they are in a positive environment with a sense of purpose, right? Then they'll do an amazing job of innovating, and innovation is a big theme for us. That they'll do a better job of servicing our customers and making them successful and creating value for them, right? And if those things happen, guess what? Our business grows, our value grows, right? But it's not the other way around, if you know what I mean.
It's totally right, Razat. And from what I've gotten to see firsthand, it's totally true in all of the nook and crannies of Planview, which you have somehow managed. And I think this is gold and should be thought about how you do it, but that there is rigor and optimism in every corner of where you have people. And that's, if I had to boil it down to, how do I know if my people are my competitive advantage? Yeah. Every conversation you listen in on, everything are people searching for the rigorous and optimistic way forward. One without the other isn't going to do it. But when you have both of those going on, it's a pretty good sign.
Yeah. Francis, you've written and published a lot around culture and organizational culture, and you've spoken about that to us as well. Just for our audience, what is culture in the context of an organization? What does it really mean? And how does it come about? And what have you seen as some of the key ingredients of developing a culture, particularly in the backdrop of, remote working and people not being able to come into a common physical space, et cetera? Give us a sense for that.
Sure. So the most fundamental definition of culture that anyone will use is that culture exists at 3 levels. One is the artifacts. That's a thing you can capture with the still photos. The next is how people behave. So I think of a video camera for that. And then the third is how people think. And we often use the word mental models for that. So culture exists at artifacts, behaviors, mental models, or still photo, video, mind reader. Like those are the three levels of a culture. And it's important to know how they interact. And I won't go into all of that. But the bottom line, the whole reason we care about culture is because we care how people behave. We care about that middle level. But it turns out after decades of research, it's really hard to address behavior directly. Like if I tell you to do it and willpower you do it, it's usually not there when you're not in the room. And it's not there when you've left the room and then I have to tell someone else. So the real key to culture is the unlock is how I think, my mental model. If you know how I think, you will reliably know how I'm going to behave. How I think reliably manifests in behavior. And for a culture change, if you want me to behave differently, you have to then get me to think differently. So it's actually a different change. It's a different type of work than go in and do this, this, and this. We have to influence how people think. And the number one way to do that, we have known for thousands of years, is through education. And so when we take people along and we co-produce what's going along and we let them come to the answers, and we need them all to come to the same answers, which means we have to take a lot of time and education. That will give you the strongest consistency in behavior.
They're very, very interesting themes, and we can talk about so many of these. It's like different layers of an onion, right? But in the interest of time, it's fascinating how we've seen culture evolve, and again, bringing it back to leadership. Building a culture in this time requires all kinds of creativity, right? Because you no longer have the luxury of being able to get people together in a fireside chat in a common room, right? Or to walk the halls and reinforce some of the thought processes and that really drive the behaviors and the thought processes that people have in the organization. So what I find is that it requires new muscles to get developed, to communicate, and sometimes you've got to, and the problem with this remote setup that the pandemic forced on us was that you have to schedule time for everything. And so those moments of spontaneity, they evaporated, right? And so planning for those moments and still trying to find ways of having those aha moments and conversations without having an agenda, PowerPoint slides, and so on and so forth. It requires a new muscle, is what I've seen. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Razat. Although I'm so excited about it because I think it's going to accelerate the pace of innovation. If we, when we realized that the way in which we did it, which frankly was not very well, in rooms, planned, back-to-back PowerPoint slides, whatever amount of innovation we got then, if we can look at this, how are new ways to spark creativity? Oh my gosh, I feel like new us is going to thump old us, unless new us just tries to be a bad approximation of old us. So I think I look forward to all of the ways that we creatively try to unleash. And, let's first do it on our meeting schedule. Let's innovate on that, because when I look at organizations and I see back to back to back to back to back meetings and I see the rooms filled, my heart breaks for what everybody else could be doing differently. Like it's the least efficient and least curious way to do something. It's the most risk averse. Let's turn our eyes towards that and all of the fundamentals, and let's use this as a time to reset, to really think creatively about how to do things. And then I believe really exciting things are going to happen. So I would use this as a great reset and really have a lot of audacity and ambition for how we could change the way that we're getting work done, in a way, to go back to the beginning of the conversation and what your mission is in life, which is in a way that makes us even more connected. I think we can do it.
Yeah, and it's a great lead into a topic I wanted to explore is how does work happen in the enterprise? And to your point, what an amazing opportunity to reimagine how work is getting done in the enterprise. And we've got all kinds of digital assets to leverage, but it would be a shame, to your point, if it's a poor approximation of what it was in the old ways of working, right? And I think organizations are there hasn't been a better time than now to have the appetite for that. You see
Yes.
what I mean? Because we were all forced to work differently. And I think about the old ways of working and getting on planes and how inefficient was it, right? And still there's value in having the in-person interaction. I'm not discounting that, but boy, was it inefficient, right? The amount of wasted time, and most meetings, and there've been studies done on this, they're not effectively run. Right? They don't lead to the kinds of outcomes that you're looking to drive, and a lot of times meetings is not where how the work gets done. The work gets done outside of meetings, right? And so the more you can minimize the need for meetings and enable and empower the organization to actually do the work that's aligned with your strategy, the better chance you have of achieving the outcomes.
So, some of the work that's starting to come out, your point is exactly right. And a way you can show whether or not an organization is going to do well is how much open space is there on the more senior people in the organization.
Right, right.
Or because do they have any chance to participate? And,
Yeah,
it's not after hours on weekends. That's like nonsense time.
yeah,
But if you look and see, they have space for, it's got different phrases. Deep thinking is a current one, I think, just to
yeah,
make it a little romantic.
yeah,
But the
yeah,
more space that senior people have for deep
yeah,
thinking, the better the organization does. And it's usually the senior people are the first to overschedule.
yeah.
And
And
it'll be fun. It'll be fun to rethink this and reset this.
and to your point, liberating, right? And I can tell you from personal experience, I've been guilty of that myself, right? And what I've realized is the more responsibilities I have, the bigger the need for thinking time, for those gaps in
Yes.
back-to-back
Yeah.
schedules, right? And it can be more fun, but also can be liberating to put some thinking time, because everyone is in the here and now, and you as a leader, you've got to think farther out, and sometimes those scenarios of the future are not so easy to just think on the fly. You really need to take some time and introspect, right? And that doesn't happen from going from one meeting to another.
Yeah. It also doesn't happen when you're with the same group of people all the time. And that's why if you
Yeah,
regroup with other ones, that sparks difference. So if you think of the old way of thinking, there was no deep thinking, and most of the time was spent with most of the same people. I mean,
yeah,
of course we're going to thump the past. Like,
yeah,
it's not even a fair fight because we get to do
right.
all of these new things differently. And there wasn't permission to do it differently. People would have been like, whoa, 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 what are you doing?
Yeah,
Now everyone has license to innovate.
yeah. What a great theme. Everyone has a license to innovate, and the world can be a better place with that. These are fantastic themes, and I know we can keep talking for forever and ever. I'd like to transition now to the sort of the closing, and lots of people have heard about the Proust approach to questions, and in the spirit of keeping things fun and interesting, Francis, I'm gonna pose some questions to you, and if you can answer with one
Sure.
word, preferably, but also
Okay.
maybe with one sentence, that'd be great, right?
Okay.
So let's
I'm
start with,
nervous.
yeah, and it's all in good
All
fun.
good. All good. Yeah.
Uh, what's the one word or phrase you most overuse?
Unapologetic.
Awesome. What is your perfect idea of happiness?
Liberation.
What talent would you most wish you had?
Social skills. 2
You're
words.
funny. uh, what's your first digital action in the morning? When you wake up in the morning, what's the first digital interaction you have?
I delay it as long as possible. and the first thing I do is read a newspaper online, but I try to delay it for a long time.
That's great. I know you're a gadget freak. What's your favorite gadget these days?
My ATEM Mini, which allows me to do multi-views.
Oh my gosh. Uh, when you're able to travel, uh, what would be your first fun trip?
Uh, so you said fun, which is going to be hard. But my family really wants to go to Italy, and so I suspect that will be a trip in which there will be a lot of fun. I would be stunned if I was included in the fun, but
Yeah.
I will go on the trip out of desire for my family to be happy.
Well, if it's Italy, it's going to be fun and food, and one reinforces the other, right? So it's great. One last question. Your one prediction for 2022.
There's going to be a huge spread in performance in companies, and it's going to be based on a lot of things that we just talk about. The ways of winning in the past are many of them are going to be obsolete, and it's going to take everyone's going to realize it, but some are going to realize it in 3 months, and some are going to realize it in 3 years.
That's great. Francis, thank you so much. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. Thank you for taking the time. It's been a pleasure to get to know you and to work with you. Thank you so much.
It's a privilege on my side and on the side of Anne. We feel so fortunate anytime we get to spend with you and the team.
That's great.